The day I surprised my wife with a custom pink Porsche 911 worth $145,000 should have been the happiest moment of our 15-year marriage. Instead, it became the beginning of a war I never saw coming. Just hours after Amanda saw the car for the first time, Francine Westbrook, our HOA board president, stood in my driveway and said something that made me think I'd misheard. "I want it for free." I laughed, assuming it was a tasteless joke, but her eyes were ice cold. She was completely serious. That moment ignited a months-long legal battle over property rights, abuse of power, and justice. A war that exposed corruption so deep that even the state attorney general's office had to intervene. Before we dive in, comment your city and local time below. I'm Garrett Sullivan, 44 years old, and I spent the better part of my career in cybersecurity consulting for Fortune 500 companies before I retired early to freelance from home. The work pays well enough that I've been able to give my family a comfortable life in a gated community called Riverside Meadows, about 30 minutes outside Atlanta. Amanda, my wife of 15 years, is a stay-at-home mom with a passion for art and community volunteering. Our daughter Sophie just started 8th grade and has her mother's creative spirit. We moved into this neighborhood 8 years ago, and until 3 days ago, we'd never had a single problem with the HOA. Life was stable, predictable, and honestly, a little boring in the best possible way. The idea for the Porsche came 2 years ago when Amanda and I were watching an old movie together, and she mentioned offhand how she'd always dreamed of owning a pink sports car ever since she was a little girl, drawing pictures of ballerinas and fancy cars. She laughed it off as a silly childhood fantasy, but I saw the wistfulness in her eyes. That's when I decided I'd make it happen. I started setting aside money from every freelance contract, working extra hours, and coordinating secretly with a specialty dealer 3 hours away to create the exact shade of ballet slipper pink she'd described. It took months of planning, countless emails, and more than a few white lies about where I was going on certain Saturdays. I wanted everything to be perfect for our 15th anniversary. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and that perfect Georgia sunshine that makes everything look like it's glowing. I told Amanda I had a surprise and led her out to the garage with her eyes covered, Sophie trailing behind us, barely able to contain her excitement. When I pulled the door open and told Amanda she could look, the expression on her face made every hour of overtime worth it. She stood there with her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, and then she turned and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Sophie was jumping up and down, screaming about how cool her mom was going to look driving it for about 20 minutes. We were just a normal family celebrating something wonderful together. Amanda sat in the driver's seat, running her hands over the steering wheel, and I took pictures of her and Sophie posing with the car. I made sure to photograph the certificate of title and bill of sale, too, tucking them carefully into our home safe afterward. Something about my security background made me always document important purchases properly. Everything felt right. Then I heard a car pull into our driveway, and when I looked up, I saw Francine Westbrook's 12-year-old silver Mercedes idling at the end of our walkway. Francine is 54, a real estate agent who's been the HOA board president for 6 years now, and she has a reputation in the neighborhood for being extremely particular about rules. I'd only interacted with her a handful of times, mostly at annual meetings or the occasional community event, and she'd always struck me as the type who enjoyed having authority a little too much. She stepped out of her car and walked slowly up our driveway, her eyes locked on the Porsche with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't admiration or curiosity. It was something darker, hungrier, like she was calculating something in her head. "Good morning, Francine," I said, trying to keep things friendly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She barely acknowledged me. "That's a Porsche 911, she said flatly. "Custom paint. What year?" The specificity of her question caught me off guard. 2024, I answered. "Just picked it up yesterday." She nodded slowly, and I noticed she knew exactly what she was looking at, which seemed odd for someone who drove a decade-old sedan. Francine walked closer, and without asking permission, she ran her finger along the hood. Amanda's entire body went rigid beside me, and I saw her hands clench. "Francine," Amanda said, her voice strained. "Please don't touch it." Francine ignored her completely. "How much did you pay for this?" she asked me, and the question felt like a violation somehow, too personal, Too invasive. I hesitated, but she was staring at me expectantly. So I told her. Around 145,000. Her face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Something cold and calculating. That's quite a lot of money to spend on a car, she said slowly, still running her hand over the paint. Sophie moved closer to her mother, sensing something was wrong. Then Francine turned to look directly at me and said the words that would change everything. I want it. For free. The statement hung in the air like a slap. I actually laughed out loud because surely she had to be joking, but when I looked at her face, there was no hint of humor anywhere. She was staring at me with this entitled expression, like she'd just made a perfectly reasonable request and was waiting for me to comply. I'm sorry. What? I said, certain I'd misunderstood. I want this car, Francine repeated, speaking slowly like I was a child. You can clearly afford to give it to me. It would be a generous gesture to someone who works so hard for this community. Amanda stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. Francine, this is my anniversary gift from my husband. It's not for sale, and it's certainly not up for donation. Francine's smile didn't reach her eyes. We'll see about that, she said quietly, and the threat in her voice was unmistakable. There are rules in this community, and I'm sure we can find something that applies here. Then she turned and walked back to her car, leaving me standing there wondering if I'd just imagined the entire conversation. Sophie tugged on my sleeve, her voice small. Dad, what just happened? I shook my head, trying to process it. I have no idea, sweetheart, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever it wasn't over. 24 hours after Francine's bizarre demand, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. The return address was from Riverside Meadows HOA, and when I opened it, I found a violation notice printed on letterhead that looked hastily formatted. The document claimed that my wife's Porsche violated Section 14.3.7 of our community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, specifically citing exotic vehicle color restrictions. The fine was $500, payable within 14 days, with an additional warning that continued non-compliance would result in escalating penalties. I read it 3 times, my confusion growing with each pass. In 8 years of living here, I'd never heard of any restrictions on vehicle colors, and the speed of this notice arriving exactly 1 day after our confrontation felt too calculated to be coincidence. I went straight to my home office and pulled out the thick binder containing our community's CC&Rs that we'd received when we purchased the house. I spent an hour searching for Section 14.3.7 or anything related to vehicle aesthetics. There was nothing. Section 14 covered architectural modifications and landscaping, but it only went up to 14.2.9. The section Francine cited simply did not exist. That's when I started to get suspicious. I called Robert Carlson, a retired teacher who lives 3 houses down and has been in this neighborhood longer than anyone else I know. Robert is 67, keeps meticulous records, and serves on various community committees. Robert, do you know anything about vehicle color restrictions in our CC&Rs? I asked when he picked up. There was a long pause. No. Garrett, why do you ask? When I explained the situation, he went quiet for a moment before responding. Garrett, I need to tell you something, but you didn't hear it from me, Robert said slowly. 3 years ago, I had a vintage 1967 Mustang that I'd restored myself. Francine saw it one day and asked if I'd sell it to her. When I said no, suddenly I started getting violation notices about my fence being non-compliant, even though it had been there for 15 years without any issues. The fines kept escalating until I was facing $8,000 in penalties and potential legal action. I sold the Mustang just to make the harassment stop. Robert's story sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about my car. This was a pattern of coercion. Did you ever fight back? I asked. I thought about it, Robert admitted, but I was dealing with my wife's cancer treatments at the time, and I just didn't have the energy for a legal battle. I've regretted it ever since. If Francine's doing this to you, don't back down. Document everything. I thanked him and immediately started a detailed timeline on my computer, logging every interaction with Francine, every photograph I'd taken, and every piece of correspondence. My cybersecurity background has taught me that evidence is only useful if it's organized and verifiable. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA's property management company, a third-party firm called Prestige Community Management that handles day-to-day operations for our neighborhood. The email was from a woman named Jennifer Torres, who identified herself as the compliance coordinator. Mr. Sullivan, I received a copy of the violation notice issued to your address regarding vehicle aesthetics. I wanted to reach out personally because this is the first I've heard of this specific section, and I cannot locate it in our master copy of the CCNRs. Can you confirm whether you received this notice directly from a board member rather than through our office? We typically process all violations through our system to ensure accuracy. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. The email's tone was professional but clearly confused, and it confirmed what I'd already suspected. Francine had issued this violation unilaterally, without going through proper channels. I called Jennifer immediately, and she answered on the second ring. Ms. Torres, this is Garrett Sullivan. I just got your email about the violation notice. Yes, Mr. Sullivan, she said, and I could hear her typing. I've been going through our records, and I'm not seeing any authorization for this notice. Can I ask how you received it? I explained that it appeared in my mailbox on Sunday, and that I'd confirmed the cited section doesn't exist in my copy of the CCNRs. Jennifer was silent for a moment. That's very concerning, she said finally. Board members have the authority to identify potential violations, but all official notices are supposed to go through our office for verification before being sent to residents. If Mrs. Westbrook issued this without proper authorization, that's a serious procedural problem. I'm going to need to escalate this to our senior management. Would you be willing to send me a copy of the notice you received? I told her I'd scan and email it immediately, and she thanked me before adding something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Sullivan, off the record, this isn't the first time we've had concerns about Mrs. Westbrook's conduct. Please keep all communications documented. That evening, I was in my garage organizing tools with the side door propped open for ventilation when I heard Francine's voice outside. The acoustics in our cul-de-sac carry sound surprisingly well, and she was standing right near my driveway talking on her phone, apparently not realizing anyone could hear her. If I can get that car, I can flip it or finally have something that shows I'm not a failure, she was saying, her voice tight with frustration. David's been pressuring me about the money I owe him, and if I don't come up with something soon, he's going to pull out of the partnership entirely. She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. I don't care what it takes. That car is worth more than my last 6 sales commissions combined. I deserve it more than some spoiled housewife who does nothing all day. I felt anger surge through me, but I stayed quiet and calm, pulling out my phone and starting a voice recording. She kept talking about financial pressure, about owing someone named David money, about needing the Porsche for reasons that had nothing to do with community standards or regulations. This wasn't about rules. This was about desperation and greed, plain and simple. When Francine finally ended her call and drove away, I went inside and found Amanda in the kitchen, looking worried. That woman is unhinged, she said quietly. Sophie asked me today if we're going to have to give up the car. I pulled Amanda close and looked her in the eyes. We're not giving up anything, I told her firmly. But I think we need to be ready for this to get worse before it gets better. I didn't tell her about the phone conversation I'd overheard. Not yet. But I backed up the recording to 3 separate locations and added it to my growing evidence file. Francine had just revealed her true motive, and she had no idea I'd captured every single word. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had something concrete. Something that showed exactly what kind of person we were dealing with. The question now was what she would do next. 5 days after the first violation notice, a second envelope arrived via certified mail requiring my signature. The new notice escalated the fine to $5,000 for continued non-compliance with community aesthetic standards, and included a formal warning that the HOA board was authorized to place a lien on my property if payment wasn't received within 30 days. A lien meant they could legally attach a claim to my house, potentially affecting my ability to sell or refinance, and in extreme cases, even force a sale to satisfy the debt. The letter also included an invoice for $1,200 in legal fees, claiming my refusal to comply had necessitated consultation with the HOA's attorney. I stared at the document in disbelief. $6,200 in total penalties for a vehicle that was legally purchased, properly registered, and parked in my own driveway. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was financial warfare designed to force my hand. Amanda found me in the kitchen that evening, The notices spread across the table. "Garrett, this is insane," she said, her voice shaking. "Are they really going to put a lien on our house over the color of a car?" I could see genuine fear in her eyes. "They can threaten all they want," I told her. "I've been documenting everything, and I'm not paying a single cent for violations that don't exist in our actual governing documents." What worried me more was how this was affecting her beyond the financial threat. That afternoon, Amanda had come back from the community pool with Sophie, looking visibly shaken. When I asked what happened, she told me that 3 different neighbors had turned away when she tried to say hello, and she'd overheard 2 women whispering and glancing in her direction. Someone was spreading poison through our community, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The next morning, I discovered exactly how far Francine was willing to go, checking community message boards online. I saw a post from an anonymous account that was clearly her writing style. "Concerned residents should be aware that some people in our neighborhood are flaunting excessive wealth through inappropriate vehicle displays. Questions have been raised about the source of funds for certain luxury purchases, when people suddenly acquire assets worth more than many families' annual income. It's reasonable to wonder where that money came from. The HOA is investigating potential violations, and residents are encouraged to report any suspicious financial activity." The post didn't name us directly, but it didn't have to. We were the only family in Riverside Meadows with a pink Porsche. Francine was publicly suggesting my money wasn't legitimate, implying criminal activity without quite committing libel. Sophie had already gotten questions at school from kids whose parents lived in our neighborhood, asking if her dad was in trouble with the law. Our 13-year-old daughter was being dragged into an adult woman's vindictive campaign over a car she had no right to. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. A man's voice introduced himself as David Kellerman, owner of Kellerman Auto Auction and Consignment. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand you recently purchased a custom Porsche 911, he said, his tone friendly but calculating. "I'm calling because I have a client interested in acquiring that specific vehicle. I'm authorized to offer you $130,000, which I know is below what you paid, but it's fair market value for a quick cash sale. The offer stands for 48 hours. My stomach dropped. "How did you get my number? And who's your client?" I asked. David hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to disclose that, but I can assure you this is legitimate business. Sometimes people find that certain purchases don't work out as planned, and it's easier to liquidate assets quickly. Given some of the concerns circulating in your community, you might find this offer beneficial." The threat was thinly veiled. He was suggesting I sell to avoid further problems, and the fact that he knew about community concerns meant he was connected to Francine. After hanging up, I did some research on Kellerman Auto Auction and Consignment. The company was registered to David Kellerman, but when I checked the business filings, I found something revealing. The company had a silent partner listed as F. Westbrook Enterprises. Francine wasn't just harassing us to get the car for herself. She was connected to a business that profited from forcing distressed sales. The pattern crystallized: create violations, escalate fines, damage reputations, then acquire valuable assets through her business partner at below-market prices. Robert's Mustang had probably ended up in their inventory. How many other neighbors had been victimized this way? I took screenshots of everything and added them to my evidence file. Then started making a list of every family in our neighborhood who'd suddenly sold valuable property or vehicles in the past few years. This wasn't just personal harassment. This was organized financial predation. That evening, I took Amanda and Sophie out for dinner away from the neighborhood, trying to give everyone some normalcy and distance from the toxicity. On the way back, around 8:30 p.m., we drove past the community center and I noticed Francine's Mercedes parked outside next to a dark blue BMW. Through the large front windows, which were brightly lit from inside while the parking lot remained dim, I could clearly see Francine and a man I assumed was David Kellerman having what looked like an intense conversation. They were both gesturing animatedly, completely focused on each other and oblivious to the parking lot outside. I pulled into a spot about 50 feet away where the shadows kept us hidden, and I took several clear photos through the window with my phone. The connection between the HOA president and the auto dealer wasn't just financial on paper. They were actively coordinating in person, and they felt comfortable enough to meet openly in our community center. When we got home, Sophie went straight to her room without saying much, and Amanda sat on the couch looking exhausted and defeated. "How much worse is this going to get?" she asked quietly. I sat beside her and took her hand, seeing the toll this was taking on the woman I'd wanted to surprise with a dream gift. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not letting them destroy our family over their greed. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a lawyer. It's time to fight back the right way, with the system, with evidence, and with someone who knows exactly how to handle people like Francine." Amanda nodded, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. We weren't backing down. We were going on the offensive. Monday morning at 9 a.m., I sat in the office of David Brennan, a property rights attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in a restored historic building downtown, walls covered with framed case outcomes and bar certifications. David was 48, with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every trick abusive HOA boards could pull. His consultation fee was $350 per hour, and I'd booked a 2-hour session to lay out everything I had. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "tell me everything from the beginning, and don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." I'd come prepared with a comprehensive binder of the violation notices. My CCNRs showing the cited sections didn't exist. Jennifer Torres's email questioning the unauthorized notices, screenshots of defamatory posts, photos of Francine and David meeting, business documents linking them through F. Westbrook Enterprises, and the audio recording of Francine admitting she wanted the car for financial reasons. David spent 40 minutes reviewing everything I'd brought, his expression shifting from professional interest to something closer to satisfaction. "This is exceptional documentation," he said, pausing at the business registration showing Francine's partnership with Kellerman Auto Auction. "She's using her HOA position to create violations, damage reputations, then profit through forced sales to her business partner. That's not just abuse of power. That's potentially conspiracy and racketeering." He looked up at me. "How many other families have been affected?" I pulled out my list. "At least 7 in the past 4 years. Vintage cars, motorcycles, and even a restored boat after sudden garage violations. 3 families are willing to provide statements." David leaned back. "That establishes a pattern. Now here's what we're going to do. First, we file a formal open records request with the HOA under Georgia law," David explained. "They have 30 days to provide complete copies of all board meeting minutes, financial records, and any documentation of this Section 14.3.7 that Francine cited. If they can't produce it, that's evidence of falsification. Second, we filed a complaint with the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. That handles HOA oversight. Third, we prepare a comprehensive counterclaim against Francine personally and the HOA board for harassment, defamation, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll seek dismissal of all fines, compensation for legal fees, damages, and Francine's immediate removal from the board." The scope of his strategy was overwhelming. "How strong is our case?" I asked. "On a scale of 1 to 10, this is an 8, David said. "The recorded conversation and business connection give us multiple angles. When is your next annual meeting?" I checked my phone. 3 weeks, second Saturday of the month. David smiled. "Perfect. That gives us time to complete the open records request and prepare a presentation that will make it impossible for the board to ignore this." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with David to build our case with the precision I'd once used in cybersecurity. We sent the formal open records request via certified mail, and when the documents arrived, they were revealing in what they didn't contain. There was no record of any board vote to create Section 14.3.7. There was no record of any discussion about vehicle restrictions in meeting minutes for the past 10 years. But what we found in the subpoenaed email records was devastating. Francine had sent a message to 2 other board members. "We need to create pressure on the Porsche owner. Draft a violation citing Section 14.3.7. One board member, Gerald Hopkins, had replied, "That section doesn't exist in our CCNRs." Francine's response was chilling. "Then add it to the updated guidelines I'm circulating. Backdate if necessary." That single email was smoking gun evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and falsification of legal documents. David immediately filed it with our counterclaim and our complaint to the state attorney general. "This is the kind of evidence that ends careers and potentially results in criminal charges," David told me during our next meeting. Falsifying HOA documents to extort money can fall under Georgia's RICO statutes when there's a pattern. Federal law allows up to 5 years in prison for making false statements in documents with legal authority under Title 18, Section 1001. The EEOC could also get involved with penalties reaching $300,000, though that's less likely here. Regardless, the threat of federal involvement will put enormous pressure on the HOA's insurance company and legal counsel. The implications were staggering. Francine had created fake legal documents, ordered others to backdate them, and used them to extort thousands of dollars. This wasn't just petty HOA overreach. This was organized financial fraud. As the annual meeting approached, David and I prepared a 30-minute presentation with exhibits ready to project on screen, witness statements, and a formal motion to remove Francine from the board requiring an immediate vote. The key is to remain calm and factual. David coached me. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't get emotional or make personal attacks. Present the timeline, show the documents, explain the financial connection to Kellerman, and let the other homeowners see exactly what's been happening in their name. I practiced the presentation multiple times, making sure every claim was backed by specific exhibits. The centerpiece would be projecting that email chain on a large screen where everyone could read Francine's own words, backdate if necessary. Those 3 words would destroy any credibility she had left. Amanda watched my final practice run through and squeezed my hand. "You're going to expose her," she said softly. "Finally, everyone will see who she really is." I felt the weight of what was coming. In 3 days, Francine would face the entire community she'd pretended to serve, and there would be nowhere to hide. David had also prepared me for Francine's likely reactions. People like her, when cornered with irrefutable evidence, tend to do one of 2 things, he explained. They either shut down completely and try to maintain dignity, or they lash out emotionally and reveal their true character. Based on everything you've told me about her entitlement and desperation, I suspect she'll crack under pressure. When she does, let her. The more she talks, the worse it gets for her. I thought about that recording I'd made of her phone conversation, about how she'd called Amanda a spoiled housewife, about how she'd admitted wanting our car to prove she wasn't a failure. David was right. Francine's need to be seen as important and successful was her fatal weakness. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through the presentation in my head, imagining how the other homeowners would react when they saw the evidence. Some of them had avoided Amanda, had whispered about us, had believed Francine's insinuations about suspicious wealth. Tomorrow, they would learn the truth. They would see that their HOA president had been running a criminal enterprise, using her authority to target families with valuable assets and forcing them to sell at a loss to her business partner. They would see the fabricated documents, the backdate order, the pattern of victims, and they would have to choose whether to stand with justice or continue enabling corruption. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., and when I woke up 5 hours later, I felt oddly calm. Today was the day everything changed. Today. Francine Westbrook's carefully constructed facade would shatter in front of everyone who'd ever trusted her. The Riverside Meadows Community Center was packed when Amanda and I arrived at 10 a.m. Saturday morning. Every chair was filled, and people lined the walls. I counted at least 52 homeowners, the largest turnout for an annual meeting in years. Francine sat at the head table with 3 other board members, looking confident in a navy blazer, her usual armor of authority firmly in place. David Brennan sat beside me in the front row, his laptop connected to the projection system. When Francine opened the floor for resident concerns after routine business, I stood immediately. "Madam President, I'm requesting 15 minutes under Robert's Rules of Order to address a serious matter." Francine's expression tightened. "You have 10 minutes. Mr. Sullivan." David stood. "Under Georgia HOA statutes, Mr. Sullivan is entitled to 15 minutes for substantive concerns." Francine's jaw clenched, but she nodded. "Fine, 15 minutes." I walked to the front as David began the presentation. The first slide showed the violation notices. 3 weeks ago, I purchased a vehicle for my wife. Mrs. Westbrook immediately demanded that I give it to her for free. When I refused, I received these violations citing Section 14.3.7, Exotic Vehicle Color Restrictions. The next slide showed our actual CC&Rs side by side with the violation. That section doesn't exist. It never has. Prestige Community Management confirmed they never authorized these notices. Jennifer Torres, sitting in the back, nodded when several people turned to look. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Francine's face began to flush. Through legal discovery, we obtained internal board emails, I continued. David projected the email chain. Mrs. Westbrook wrote draft a violation citing section 14.3.7. Board member Gerald Hopkins replied, that section doesn't exist. Her response, then add it to the updated guidelines, backdate if necessary. The room erupted. Francine shot to her feet. This is taken out of context. You have no right. David stood calmly. These were obtained through a legal open records request under Georgia law. Everything here is legitimate evidence. There's more, I said. Mrs. Westbrook has a silent partnership with David Kellerman of Kellerman Auto Auction, registered as F. Westbrook Enterprises. 3 years ago, Robert Carlson was forced to sell his vintage Mustang after fabricated violations. We've identified 7 families targeted this way. Valuable assets, artificial violations, financial pressure, and then below-market acquisition through the partnership. I projected business documents and photos of Francine meeting Kellerman at this community center. Angry murmurs grew louder. People pulled out their phones, photographing the screen. Francine had gone pale. You can't prove conspiracy, she said, voice shaking. I was maintaining community standards. My business interests are private. David stepped forward. Using your HOA position to create violations for personal financial gain is abuse of authority, fraud, and potentially racketeering under Georgia law. That's when Francine snapped. She slammed the table. Fine. Yes, I wanted that car. I deserve it more than his spoiled wife. I'm the one who runs this community. That car should be mine. I've been driving a 12-year-old sedan while people like him show off. Silence. Every phone was recording. The other board members stared in horror. Patricia Rosen, another board member, stood. Francine, sit down. You're done. But Francine wasn't finished. You all have no idea what it's like after my divorce. After losing everything, I finally had authority, respect, and people just flaunt their wealth like it means nothing. She was crying, mascara running. David seized the moment. I move for an immediate vote to remove Francine Westbrook from the board for abuse of authority, fabrication of violations, and conduct detrimental to the community. Patricia seconded. The vote was called. 48 hands rose in favor. 2 abstained, 0 opposed. Francine trembled. You can't do this. This community is mine. No, I said quietly. This community belongs to all of us, and we just took it back. The room erupted in applause. Francine gathered her things and walked out. Her Mercedes left the parking lot for the last time. She was finished, exposed, defeated. Justice had been served. The week following the meeting moved fast. On Monday morning, the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division opened a formal investigation into Francine Westbrook's conduct as HOA Board President. David Brennan had filed our comprehensive complaint with few supporting evidence, and the state took it seriously. By Wednesday, Francine received notice that she was under investigation for falsification of HOA documents, abuse of fiduciary duty, and potential violations of Georgia's Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The legal pressure was immediate and devastating. Her real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, cutting off her primary source of income. David Kellerman, her business partner, immediately dissolved their partnership and issued a public statement distancing himself from her actions, clearly trying to avoid being dragged into criminal liability. The auto auction business was now under scrutiny as well, with investigators looking into how many other distressed sales had been orchestrated through fabricated HOA violations. The civil lawsuit I filed against Francine personally moved forward quickly once her public confession at the meeting became part of the official record. Multiple homeowners had recorded her breakdown on their phones, and those videos were submitted as evidence. My attorney, David Brennan, estimated that between harassment, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process, we had a strong case for substantial damages. Francine's insurance company, after reviewing the evidence, including her own recorded admission of wrongdoing, pressured her to settle. Within 3 weeks, we reached an agreement. Francine would pay $45,000 in damages to our family. covering our legal fees of $14,000 at $350 per hour for 40 hours of David's work, compensation for the emotional harm to Amanda and Sophie, and punitive damages for her conduct. Additionally, the HOA itself was fined $680 by federal authorities for failing to properly post meeting notices according to required procedures, a violation of Federal Register 2024 guidelines. The HOA's insurance also covered our legal costs, and all fines and violations against us were formally dismissed and expunged from our property records. But the financial consequences were only part of Francine's downfall. The social cost was far more severe. Within days of the meeting, she put her house up for sale and moved out of Riverside Meadows entirely. The community that she'd claimed to serve had completely rejected her. Neighbors who'd once deferred to her authority now openly discussed how manipulative and corrupt she'd been. Robert Carlson and 3 other families who'd been victimized came forward publicly, and their stories made local news. The headline read, "HOA President Accused of Running Extortion Scheme Through Fake Violations." Francine's reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Her social connections, her professional network, everything she'd built her identity around, collapsed in a matter of weeks. She became a cautionary tale, the embodiment of what happens when someone abuses a small amount of power for personal gain and gets caught. Meanwhile, positive changes swept through Riverside Meadows. The HOA held emergency elections and installed a completely new board committed to transparency and accountability. They hired a professional management company with stronger oversight and implemented new policies requiring all violations to be reviewed by independent legal counsel before being issued. They also established a formal appeals process for homeowners and created quarterly financial audits to prevent any future abuse. Jennifer Torres from Prestige Community Management was promoted and given expanded authority to ensure board members couldn't bypass proper procedures again. The entire governance structure was reformed, and the community felt safer and more democratic than it had in years. Several neighbors apologized to Amanda personally for believing the rumors Francine had spread, and Sophie's friends at school stopped asking uncomfortable questions about our family's finances. Life slowly returned to normal. But it was a better normal, one where accountability actually mattered. On a sunny Saturday morning, exactly 2 months after everything began, Amanda drove her pink Porsche out of our garage with Sophie in the passenger seat, both of them laughing. They were heading to a community car show that our neighborhood was hosting, and Amanda had been asked to display her car as a symbol of standing up for what's right. As I watched them drive away, I thought about everything we'd been through, the harassment, the financial threats, the damage to our reputation, the stress on our family. But we'd fought back the right way, with evidence and the legal system, and we'd won. Francine had tried to use her position to take something that didn't belong to her, and she'd paid the price. The system worked when people stood up and demanded accountability. If you've ever dealt with HOA abuse, corrupt authority figures, or people who think their position gives them the right to whatever they want, remember this document everything. Know your rights, and don't back down when you're in the right. The legal system isn't perfect, but it's there to protect property owners from exactly this kind of harassment. And if you enjoyed this story of justice finally being served, make sure you subscribe to Karma Clause for more stories where people who abuse their power get exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment below about your own HOA nightmares or times you had to stand up to someone abusing authority. Sometimes the only way to stop corruption is to shine a light on it and refuse to be intimidated. That's exactly what we did, and that's exactly what you can do too.